Kia ora everyone, my name's Ben Hoyle and I'm a garden designer here in New Zealand. I'm also the ambassador for LCGD here in New Zealand, and I'm here today to talk a little bit about some of the plants in my own garden. Now it's probably larger than some of the gardens we've seen so far. It's a 1/4 acre, but it is divided into a series of different areas by the home, and the garden I'm standing in now is what I call the front garden. It's quite traditional in many respects because we live in an old colonial villa, but there's also a lot of native plants which I like to include in this garden. This is probably one of my favourites. It's Typha orientalis. You might know it as the bulrush. Here in New Zealand we call it raupo, and our friends across the Tasman and Australia, kumbunji. Now, historically for Māori, really important plant here because this was a plant that was commonly used for weaving in meeting houses, for the walls and the roofs. And for even making a poi for dancing. And inside this wonderful seed head here is sort of almost a kapok type material which was used for stuffing those poi. It was used in mattresses. It was a really important plant. Even the rhizome was an important food source. They tell me actually the pollen from this plant was used to make a sweet cake. I haven't tried it, but there you go. Now, it's a really important plant, raupo, in terms of purifying water. So in our wetlands in New Zealand, it's a really important plant, whether they're man-made or natural. And here in my own pond, of course, it does a wonderful job of purifying the water. We've got fish in here and they spawn freely, they breed really, they're happily in this water, and I don't have to actually do too much to it, which is really great. I'll let this plant pretty much go brown right through the winter. I enjoy watching it go through that seasonal change, and I won't really probably cut it back until the spring when those new shoots come through. So it's a wonderful plant, and here I think this is something that we should do more of in gardens, is actually encourage lots of height. So what is a relatively small water feature, only about 1 metre across this trough, has got 3 metres of impact running up into the sky. So a really wonderful plant for giving movement and what would have been probably quite a nondescript feature in the garden. I guess something that's a bit more of a bog standard plant in my garden, which I really love, and it's been here for a long time, is the fennel. This is bronze fennel, and I use it here really for a number of reasons. It's a great one primarily for bees and other insects in the garden. This time of the year it's all about the seeds, and the wax eyes and other birds just cover this plant, and they just love to feed on it at this time of the year. I do too sometimes. It's a lovely aniseed taste, but for me, again, it's that lovely tall plant which in what are quite narrow beds gives us that lovely vertical element. So yeah, as I say, it's probably, you know, my parents would probably call this plant a wee, but in my own garden I absolutely love it and adore it. Underneath it here we've got lovely anamanthale, which again is a native for us here, and it goes right through the season. And so for me, tall plants give me this opportunity to underplant, which I think is really important. This time of the year, of course, late summer, it's, you know, Miscanthus, these sorts of grasses really come into their own. Of course, it's not a native for us here in New Zealand, but for me, I guess when we get into the sort of late summertime, I'm really starting to look in my own garden, and I guess clients' gardens too, at what are those gaps, because in the middle of winter sometimes it can be hard to read. So this time of year I find it's a really good chance to go around my own garden and clients' gardens and say, you know, where are those gaps, where are those sort of hit and misses that we've had in the season. And when you've got a plant like this already on tap too, it's actually great to actually pick it up, find a gap in your own garden and actually fill it in. So you actually stand back and have a look and decide, actually, am I going to put you there this winter? So it's a really good chance to actually place and look and decide what you're going to do for the growing season. I don't actually like it there, but this is the whole point. I get to experiment with it. Of course, divaricating plants, unusual plants. Andrew talked about the Pseudopanax crassifolius in one of his segments, and this is probably another one that's quite interesting. And we have a lot of what we call divaricating plants here in New Zealand, plants that have those twiggy, almost right angle sort of growing habits. And here I've actually trained this interesting plant. This is Capras aerulata. Now it's actually probably quite a bog standard plant in the wild, but here we've actually made it quite interesting, and we've played on the fact that this highly divaricating habit is great for clipping. So here, this is just me having a bit of fun. Through the evolutionary process, you know, this idea of growing in this complex shape was really about stopping grazing, and we don't have really cattle in New Zealand historically. We do now, of course, but way back when it was all about things like moa, these giant 4-metre birds which would actually try and graze plants like this. So this divaricating habit was really a defence mechanism against that browsing. on the north side of the garden, there's this narrow, probably only 3 metres, and it's probably indicative, I guess, a lot of those smaller sections that people live in. And for me, this is the area where I grow a lot of my edibles. It's north facing, so that makes it a really good spot for growing fruit trees. And I like fruit trees in the garden because, you know, they're what I call the long-lived edibles. You know, you can have those seasonal ones, but these are the ones that are there year in, year out. And for me, this is one of the star performers. It's a dual grafted plum. It's got 2 varieties, Burbank and Hawera, and I kid you not, bunches of fruit like grapes on here. So it's a really great plant for us. We made jam for the first time this year, which was absolutely fabulous. I keep this tree down to about 3 to 4 metres, and I think, you know, where you're planting trees that would naturally grow quite big, it's important to manage the growth, but it certainly can be done if you want to get these sorts of plants in your own garden. So if you're prepared to put a little bit of effort in, and it's not a lot, you get rewarded with a great crop. On this side here we have things like lime, which gets lots of sun. I've underplanted these with calla lilies, and I'm a big, I guess, proponent of putting flowering plants amongst your edibles. These pillar apples, I think, are absolutely wonderful in a narrow space. This series, the Ballerina series, are absolutely wonderful. This is a variety called Bolero, and we've got Waltz over here, and they won't grow any wider than probably 30 or 40 centimetres. So they're a plant that don't require much of any pruning, and so for those that don't have a lot of time but also have that narrow space, the pillar apple is really a superstar. You can see the fruit starting to form on the feijoa here. This is called mammoth, and as the name suggests, these fruits will get a lot bigger than this, and so we have lots of feijoa eaters in our household. And here we go, the wonderful fig. This is called candy, and I think figs in barrels are always great because otherwise, of course, they would be enormous. And here we've got some rather blousy petunias growing underneath. It's that idea of including colour, I guess, with my edibles, which I love to do. So that's just one part, I guess, of the garden here in NZ. Over the next week or two we'll show you another part, perhaps the shadier parts of the garden. So look forward to talking to you then.